We'll discuss the mitzvah of Kibud of the aim, honoring one's parents, and then specifically we'll get into the question of honoring grandparents. Are they included in this commandment of honoring parents, or are they no different than any elderly people? We have a big mitzvah to treat them properly. Is there a bigger inyan of treating grandparents more than any other elderly people? Or maybe if you have young grandparents, any younger age people. But is there a special mitzvah of Kibud of aim or not? So, just to go over some basics, and then we'll move on to grandparents. The Torah tells us, and it's one of the Aseres HaDibros, Kabed es avicha v'esimecha, we learn out the mitzvah of honoring one's parents. And it's the fifth one on the Aseres HaDibros. And the question is, it seems to be on the wrong side of the tablet, because Chazal tell us, our rabbis tell us, that there are two tablets. Why two? Why not 22? Why not 1? Why not 10? So our rabbis tell us because there are two basic categories of mitzvahs. There are commandments between man and God, and mitzvahs bet adam lechavero, and interpersonal mitzvahs. And the Torah, so the question is, or it seems to be on the wrong side of the tablets, because Kibud V'Aim seems to be a mitzvah bet adam lechavero, a mitzvah to honor people. Your parents are people too. So the Gemara tells us, and Chazal tell us, that really there are three creators: Mommy, Daddy, and God. And that's the Minchas Chinuch points out, it's a unique character of Kibud V'Aim. It's both a mitzvah bet adam l'makom and a mitzvah bet adam l'chavero. It's both a mitzvah to man and God and man, and hence a very appropriate place on the Aseres HaDibros. It's the perfect transition from one tablet to the other, because the first five deal with commandments to our Creator. Our parents are our Creator as well. And then it's also, but Adam HaChavero, parents are people too. We have mitzvahs, we have to treat them properly. So that's the mitzvah we know of Kibud V'Aim. So there's a discussion among the Mefarshim, what about honoring one's parents? So actually there's an interesting medrash on a pasuk in Parashas Vayigash in Perek Memvav, or the pasuk, actually I have the pasuk here, the pasuk Perek Memvav pasuk Aleph. It says when Yaakov was going to Mitzrayim to see Yosef, first he wanted to bring karbanos. It says, Vayavo Be'ershava Vayizvach Zvachim, he brought karbanos, Olkei Aviv Yitzchak. He brought karbanos to the God of his father Yitzchak. So obviously Rashi and the Medrash is bothered. I wanted to mention as well the God of Avraham. It should be Avosav. So Rashi writes, we learn out from here the fact that Torah singles out Aviv Yitzchak, Chayiv Adam v'Koved Aviv Yoter miKoved Zikno. L'fichach Amar Aviv Yitzchak v'lo Tola ba'Avraham. So Rashi learns that even though there is a commandment to honor one's grandparents, that's the implication of this Rashi, but the Chiddush of this pasuk is coming to tell me that you might think that Kibud V'Aim, that you have a choice of honoring one's parents or honoring your grandparents, you either might think they're the same, or you might think grandparents are even higher level, because since your parents are obligated to honor your grandparents, and maybe even honoring one's grandparents are on a higher level. Comes along Rashi and says no, that the Chiddush here is that not only is there a mitzvah on the grandparents, but the ikr is on the parents. So that's the opinion of Rashi. We'll come back to the Ramban The Ramban asked on Rashi, and the Ramban comes up with another reason, nothing to do with Kibud Aim. The Ramban writes, quoting from the Beish's Rabbah, he said it's a sod that when Yaakov went down to Mitzrayim, he realized the exile was going to begin with him and his kids, and therefore he brought it Lezevach Aviv Yitzchak Kadei Shalote Midas Hadin, that to try to ward off the Midas Hadin, the strict judgment. So the Ramban says the fact that he only mentions Yitzchak and not Avram is not telling me anything about Kibud. Maybe there's a mitzvah, maybe there's not. It's for a totally different reason. And we'll get into an answer on Rashi in the second base with the Rabbi Kiva Eger. So is there a mitzvah to honor one's grandparents? So there's the explanation of the Maharik, who's actually brought down in the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch as well. He discusses a case where there are two people who have to say Kaddish in Shul. And it was back in the day we only had one Kaddish, at least one Kaddish every 10 people. Today you can have 10 people that are all saying Kaddish, or 25 people out of 50, because either they're coming in for yard sites, they're coming in to say Kaddish. But in the old minhag, in some places, where maybe most places, was to say Kaddish one person. So the choice was only one person was saying Kaddish. So someone was saying Kaddish for his grandfather, and someone was saying Kaddish for his father. So the Maharik says that the one who has to say Kaddish for his father wins, because there is no source to say Kaddish for a grandparent. There is no source of... Since saying Kaddish is based on Kibud Aim, honoring one's parents, since there is no obligation to honor grandparents, the Maharik says, therefore, the son wins. Of course, he does point out, although there is no halachic basis, it seems to be that there's a nice minhag Yisrael that you do honor grandparents more than regular people, but Me'ikar Adin, based on strict halacha, there is no source for honoring grandparents, and the Maharik could say, look at the pasuk, okay, Yitzchak, it only says Yitzchak to exclude Avram, that there's no reason to mention Avram because there is no mitzvah of Avi Aviv. So therefore, that's what the Maharik says. There is no mitzvah to honor a grandparent. Comes along the Ramah in Yeridea, he even quotes the opinion of the Maharik and disagrees with it. And he says that the measure is only telling me that you have to honor your grandparents not as much as your parents. It's Chayav Adam B'Chvod Aviv. It's not the same level, but one still has an obligation to honor. What it means to say is that just telling me the father takes precedence. He quotes from some of the Achronim, the Ramah, that if you have your father and your grandfather in front of you, and they, let's say, request a cup of water, so then your father takes precedence. But if your grandfather's there and your father's not around, you have the same obligations in honoring your grandparent as you would your father. So that's the Ramah. The Ramah's cholek on the Maharik, and the Ramah writes, and the way we paskin, that one has an obligation to honor one's grandparents. There's interesting Gemara in Sota, which the Maharik will want to bring a raya for. The Gemara in Sota 49a is the following Maisa. The Gemara tells us Rav Yaakov was raised in the home of his maternal grandfather, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, and when he got older, so Rav Acha Bar Yaakov asked his grandson get him a cup of water. So Rav Yaakov responds was, I'm not your son. What do you want from me? Obviously, it's very offensive Gemara from a Western society point of view. But obviously, it's not. Obviously, you can't take the Gemara from that angle. Obviously, there are many ways of learning the Gemara. In terms of the Mepharshim point out, he's just talking. Obviously, it wasn't an issue where, if it was a stranger, he'd give him a cup of water. Perhaps he was teaching him the halacha that they were talking and learning. I'm happy to get you the cup of water, but not me didn't keep it up aim. There is no halacha of honoring grandparents. But I'm happy to do it for you because you're a good guy and I like you and I like my parents, etc. So whatever the issues are, he gave it to him. But the Marik says we see from this Gemara that what do we see? That there is no obligation to honor a grandparent. So the Vilna Gaon and others want to make the following distinction. It's no raya for the Marik because you could make, perhaps the Gra suggests, not perhaps, he does suggest, that you can make a difference between whether it's a paternal grandparent or a maternal grandparent. And the Gra wants to say, even the Ramah, who agrees it's a mitzvah of honoring a grandparent, that's only paternal grandparents. But maternal grandparents, there is no mitzvah. And therefore, and that's what they do, they cite the Medrash, and even though, and that's the Gemara in Yevamos, that b'nei banim harehein kavanim, that grandkids are like your sons, grandsons are like sons, and to imply that granddaughters are not, and therefore the Vilna Gaon wants to say it's no raya from the Marik. It only applies to grandsons and not granddaughters. In other words, it's only chiyuv if it's a paternal grandparent, then there's an obligation, but a maternal grandparent there isn't. So the Torah Tamima wants to just show that at the Bavli we don't paskin like this Gemara, in terms of that we don't make a distinction between daughters or sons, it's all equal. And even the Ben Ish Chai, the Aruch HaShulchan, they say there is no distinction between a paternal grandparent and a maternal one. And therefore he writes, the reason why Rav Yaakov refused to bring water wasn't because he didn't feel there was an obligation to honor him, as we mentioned before, as he explains, like we mentioned by Rashi, that he just wants to point out that the honor of grandparents is on the same level. But not that, of course he went ahead, and he would get him the water. And again, and that's the general issue. When the Gemara says b'nei banim harehein kavanim, the Gemara is talking about in the context of pru revu. That if you leave children over, that you have grandkids and your own children die, so you can fulfill your mitzvah of pru revu. And others, the sefer haredim, don't limit it to kibud avim, don't limit it to pru revu. It's a general principle. Grandkids are like grandkids, and grandkids are like kids, and therefore there is a mitzvah of kibud avim. So it's interesting, Rabbi Akiva Eger, that we mentioned the Ramban asked on Rashi, it's the Machokas Rashi and the Ramban, why there was Avram's name left out. According to Rashi, it told me it didn't keep Avim. According to the Ramban, it was a totally different halacha. So it was interesting, Rabbi Akiva Eger. And with this we could give another answer, is he brings it b'shem Sefer Levayis Chen in our parasha. Shachida the ikar chiluk mikibud avim. He wants to make chiluk. So Rabbi Akiva Eger wants to make a distinction on the obligation of honoring grandparents, whether your parents are alive or when they're not alive. He says when your parents are alive, you're obligated in honoring your parents more. He says b'chayav mechuyev bekivud avi av yoter mikivud aviv. Kevin the Shayachan, he wants to say you're obligated to, when your parents are alive, you're obligated to honoring your grandparents more than your parents, because since your parents as well, shata v'avicha chayachav bekivud avim, like the Gemara tells us in Kedushin. However, but la'acha misa saviv mechuyev bekivud aviv yoter mikivud. He wants to say the distinction is while your grandparents are alive, or while your parents are alive, so therefore you have an obligation to give obligation to your grandparents more, because your parents are obligated in them, both you, etc. So he wants to make a distinction. La'acha misas aviv when if it's if your parents are alive or not. And when they're alive, so then he says there's a distinction. So that's what he wants to point out here. Mefizeh miyushav kushus haramban. The b'chol hani makomos to Yaakov Avinu. His care. So he wants to point out, based on this, dama that there are certain times in the Chumash when Yaakov mentions Yitzchak and Abraham, and other times he only mentions Yitzchak. So he says, "Ma'irish Avraham Avinu adayin hu chai, v'az hayachai b'chvod yoter." When Avraham Avinu was alive, so then he had more obligation, because since he had to honor his grandfather because his father was obligated, and so therefore he mentioned Avram. In our parsha, Shekfar Nistalik Avram, he only mentioned Yitzchak. So this distinction, Rabbi Kiva Eker, that we have a greater obligation for grandparents while they're still alive. But obviously, when they're dead, you can still honor somebody after they're dead. But in terms you don't have while your grandparents are alive, your parents also have the obligation. So perhaps you could argue grandparents are on a higher level. Either way, we're going to get into that whole issue of Kibud Avev and grandparents, and whether it stems from the halacha of Kibud Avev directly from an outgrowth of your parents. To that, we'll have to continue. We'll discuss more on Kibud Avev as well as honoring grandparents, and this Ramban who made a distinction, or Rabbi Kiva Eger made a distinction that perhaps when your grandparents are alive, they even have a greater obligation to honor your grandparents. When your grandparents are dead, you have a greater obligation to honor your parents, and that's what Rashi was getting at. Rashi was saying is Yotir. What's the chiddush over here? Rashi's pointing it out because over here already Avram was dead, so therefore he only mentioned Yitzchak. But there are many other times where he mentioned both, and that was while he was still alive, and according to his Rabbi Kiva Eger, to show that honoring grandparents is even higher. So you have through different shitas in terms of not honoring. You have the Ma'arik, not honoring grandparents at all. You have Rabbi Kiva Eger, that honoring grandparents, at least when they're alive, is even greater than honoring your parents, because your parents. And then you have the middle ground, where it's called as Shitas Rashi, that there's a greater mitzvah to honor your parents, but also, of course, there's a chiyuv to honor your grandparents as well.